Good evening. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN, and I'm so excited to welcome you to tonight's conversation between Dr. Abigail Gewirtz and Dr. Renee Dominguez. Thanks for coming. FAN's a nonprofit that presents a high-quality speaker series offered free to the public on a wide variety of topics, including human development, mental health, education, social justice, among many others. We have about 100 past events on our YouTube channel, archived there, and on our website of past speakers from just years and years. So you can always take a look there as well. Make sure you explore it. Okay, so now quick intros. We now have Abby Gewirtz is a child psychologist and a leading expert on families under stress. She is a professor in the University of Minnesota's College of Education and Human Development. Her career has been devoted to developing and testing award-winning skills-based parenting programs that promote children's resilience. Professor Gewirtz has published more than 60 articles, book chapters, and a book on parenting and children's resilience. She has consulted to national and international organizations, including the U.S. Congress and UNICEF. She has conducted research in the US, in Asia, the Middle East, and Africa, and has been invited to speak widely in the US and across the world on parenting in times of stress. Renee Dominguez is a clinical psychologist who serves as the executive director of the Family Service Center, a not-for-profit community mental health agency that provides counseling, crisis response, outreach, and education to communities in the northern Chicago suburbs. Dr. Dominguez previously served as the clinical director of the Chicago Child Trauma Center at La Rabida Children's Hospital, where she spent over a decade working with traumatized children and their families on the south side of Chicago. It is my true pleasure to introduce to both of you, Dr. Gewirtz and Dr. Dominguez. Take it away, ladies. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lonnie.
Thank you so much, Lonnie, for that introduction. Hi, Abby. How are you?
Hello, Renee. Good to see you again.
It's nice to see you too. I have to say, despite my discomfort with speaking in public, I'm really excited to be here and really honored to be here to talk with you tonight about your awesome book. It was really nice touching base the other day as well. And I wanted to just let everybody know that you and I have a little bit of a history. Not a huge history, but it was.
Although that does sound a little bit ominous when you say it like that.
That we worked together, about a decade ago on a shared project within the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. We were both on Category 3 sites. We were delivering services. So anyway, it's so nice to reconnect with you. And I'm excited to be here tonight with you. Having said that, let's talk about these essential conversations and all that go into them. I have to say, in all honesty, I think this book was fantastic. It's really like I took it as a roadmap for parents who are interested in figuring out how to talk to their kids about these really difficult conversations that are really anxiety provoking, the kinds of conversations where parents dread having or feel at a loss about how to have them. So I wanted to start by asking you, what prompted you to write this book at this time? What's the story behind your motivation for doing this now?
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to say it's a treat, Renee. It's lovely to be talking with you about the book. Usually when I'm in conversation with someone, it's not another psychologist, right? So it's actually, it's really a fun thing to do this tonight in this way. So I got the idea for the book in 2016. I thought that 2016 was a tough year. Of course, I didn't have my crystal ball then to see what 2016 was like. And you can catch me out in the book and I'll tell you why. 2015 was the year in which the number of migrants around the world surpassed World War II levels for the first time. So 2016 was the first year beyond that. 2016 was a year, some of you may recall, of lockdown drills in schools after a series of widely publicized and awful school shootings. 2016 was a year where people started talking publicly about whether to bring children into a world where climate change was wreaking such havoc. And of course, since then, the number of severe weather disasters has just increased year on year. And of course, 2016, like 2020, was an election year. And it was an incredibly divided and acrimonious election year with not a lot of civility being demonstrated. And so I wondered what it would be like to have young children. My kids were just entering, the youngest was just becoming a teen in 2016. But I looked around and talked to my friends and colleagues who had very young children. And, you know, one in particular sort of telling me that she just received an email that the first lockdown drill was going to be tomorrow. And what on earth am I supposed to tell my kindergartner? Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to write the book based on the many years of research we'd done with a different kind of family under stress. These are military families exposed to in which parents had gone to fight in war. And so I was able to distill the lessons that we learned in our research to help regular parents deal with the more and more and more scary events that seem to be happening all around us.
Makes really good sense. There's a good context for this book, and it since 2016 has just grown, and it's got, right? Unfortunately.
Yeah. So joke. I mean, in the book, I write all this about 2016. In the epilogue, I write it, and in the epilogue, I say that at the beginning of 2017, Twitter had a competition, describe 2016 in 3 words, and one Twitter user wrote worst period year period ever period, and I wrote that in the book. I can't believe I wrote it in the book. Now I can't believe it. Who would have known?
Fair enough.
There you are.
Fair enough. All right. Well, you know, I think this book is really unique especially in the way it lays out examples of the difficult conversations, you know, and you named the different categories pretty much, you know, violence, natural disasters, issues around technology, social justice, and on and on. And you give examples of when things go right and when things go wrong, and you illustrate how to return to conversations and repair. It's really, really awesome stuff. And I want to spend a chunk of time talking about that, but I'm also aware, so that's a little bit of the carrot, right? I'm also aware though that you do a really nice job of laying out some ideas for parents about how to prepare for these difficult conversations. And I find myself wanting to start there, right? So, you know, one of the things you do is you encourage them to explore their own anxiety, their own emotional reactions, their histories. And so I find myself wanting to ask you a little bit about, you know, why you start there.
Right. Well, so many of the people on the call today are parents. If they're not parents, they might be grandparents, or you might be people who have children you love. And so what you all know, anyone who lives with kids knows that kids process the world through the bubble of the people they live with. Mm-hmm. And so it's hard to think about helping kids without thinking about how the things that occur outside our bubble affect me. Because, like it or not, we are our children's best teachers. And kids are like hawks or detectives. They watch us extremely carefully. Mm-hmm. And so it's not just that kids are watching us, but it's also that if you live with your biological kids, you give them the gift not only of the environment that you bring them up in, but also the genetics you endow them with. So there's this whole sort of mix of stuff that happens.
Yeah.
And so I want parents to take a little bit of time and a little bit of stock of what are the things that really upset them? What are the things that elicit in them strong emotions? And the metaphor I use, and probably there are a lot of people who haven't been on a plane for a while. I was actually just in England, and I always love looking at this. Please put your mask on before assisting others. Mm-hmm. And so I really do spend the beginning of the book helping parents think about not just how to put their own mask on, but in what circumstances they feel the need to put a mask on, right? Yeah. So what are the things, so what kind of a person are you in terms of your sensitivities to, you know, anxiety? For example, we have, you know, I tell my patients when, you know, a very small private practice, I mostly do research, but, you know, we all have gifts. So some of our families have the gift of diabetes or high blood pressure, and some families have anxiety, right? Or depression, or
those kinds of gifts.
Yeah, we all have gifts. And if your family has the gift of anxiety, then it is likely that that anxiety does not just live in the kids or the parents, but it's sort of, there's a big soup of it. Mm-hmm. And that's just one example. Emotions are obviously bigger than just anxiety, but sure. I want parents to sort of think about how they experience emotions, what they do with them, and what things help them regulate their big emotions. And the reason I want parents to think about their own sensitivities is because when you're walking into a conversation, an essential conversation with your child, you want to be prepared if this is something that is incredibly sensitive to you. For example, it relates to something that happened to you in your childhood that you still haven't really got over, because these things happen, then you might choose that, for example, to ask your partner to lead that conversation, or at least going in, you've taken some time to regulate. And so, you know, we sort of talk about emotion regulation strategies, and I don't need to go into them, but this is the idea of putting your own mask on before going into that conversation with your child and seeing your child's big emotions.
Right. I love that. It's I think foundational, and I think that parents kind of set a low ceiling in terms of ability to grow if they're not ready to do that, right? One of the things that I also found really helpful in your book is the way in which you encourage parents to very purposefully and very intentionally make the implicit explicit, right? So let's, like, at some level as parents, we know that this thing from our history, and you don't dwell on history, you don't dwell on history, but you really do a nice job of like striking a balance, in my opinion, of striking a balance of like, what are the historical factors that you bring to the table that influence your parenting? And I think at some level we all kind of know that, but there's something about the process that you lay out that makes it explicit that seems to be really helpful. And I wanted to name that and see if you had anything else you wanted to say about that, because I think it's really important.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think so sometimes I get asked about, like, you know, how did you get interested in trauma, for example? And I'm really, you know, you and I have that in common. Really, you know, all our careers have been serving or learning about families exposed to trauma. And in my case, my dad was only 5 years old in 1940 in Britain, when he was evacuated to the countryside during Hitler's blitz on Britain. And for 5 years, he almost never saw his parents. And so that is one sort of example in my history that I think maybe implicitly drew me towards trauma. And then more recently, I was young, you know, I'd only just got married. I think we were a young couple, and we were living in Israel during the Gulf War. And I wasn't a psychologist then. I was a young woman working in a hotel. I was the training manager. My job during the war, so my job normally was to teach waiters to be polite to guests, you know? And then there was the Gulf War, and the population of Israel were given gas masks, and they were told, you know, if Saddam Hussein lobs, you know, Scud missiles towards Israel, they could be chemical weapons, because we didn't know whether he had chemical weapons. And so put your gas mask on. And there I was, 24 years old, finding myself in a hotel, sealed corridor, looking at people, hearing rockets fall. And I noticed that the most terrified, the people who were the most traumatized, were the maids and the engineers, the people who worked the night shift in the hotel, who had left their kids at home. And it made me understand that I really believe that's what sort of was the genesis of my interest in trauma, that when you are away from your child or from your parent, you know, your secure base is not there, and you go through something that's really life-threatening, that's a very overwhelming and terrifying thing. And so that got me really interested in helping parents to think about what it is that not only brought them here, but also what they want, how they want to be with their children. So I call this parenting values. And I was with another group in Chicago last night, well, virtually in Chicago last night. And one of the moms said, I've never come across that term, parenting values. What do you mean? And I said, well, in the book, I tell you. But basically, those, and I have a sort of fun exercise to help parents derive their parenting values by imagining themselves older and imagining what their children say about them. And our parenting values are really the things that, as you mentioned, are implicit. Day after day, you know, we can barely get through the job of parenting. You know, I mean,
hardest job in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I had 4 kids under the age of 9, and it was a huge accomplishment if my kids all left the house with all their clothes on, if everybody got fed, and if I got 3 hours of sleep a night. I mean, that was like, so now you're telling me to like think about my parenting values. But there's a fun way to do it, to think about it, you know, and I say, so I encourage people to think about, you know, you get to an older age, your kids are grown up, they have a party for you, and they stand up to talk about what you've taught them. And one might say, you know, you, Mom, you taught me the value of a good education, or hard work, or being a loyal friend, or whatever it is. And those are your parenting values. And yeah, you're right. You know, use the word intentionality. I think a lot about the book is around helping parents, even in the wake of all the chaos and the pressure and the distractions, to be intentional in, because that's what we want for our kids. I mean, we want to bring up kids who are thoughtful and engaged and not fearful of the world and independent. And so, yes, long answer to your question.
That's a great answer. I mean, I think it's really spot on. And I appreciate that you're acknowledging there's a lot of chaos right now, and laying out sort of your own history around 3 hours of sleep. How am I supposed to have parenting values? Like, and the reality of it is, you know, as you lay it out in the book really nicely, it doesn't necessarily take a ton of time, right? If you can put aside 5 minutes a day, I think in your epilogue, you encourage people to create a 10-minute window a day, right? To be able to use this time to connect with your kid and engage, right? And so the little bit of time that you set aside can make a huge difference. I think the other thing about that, and really about the message that you, I think, deliver so nicely in this book, is that it feels empowering to me when I read your book and I think about the way you set it up and the way you lay it out for parents to sort of step by step. These are some of the things that are important to consider. These are some of the ways that you might reflect on your history, or reflect on your strengths, reflect on your weaknesses and what you can bring to the table. I feel like you give parents a really nice opportunity to impact to feel competence, to be competent, and to impact their kids' lives positively. I think parents don't always feel like they can do that. And you drop these nuggets really nicely. It's very hopeful. It's a hopeful book. And we need some hope in this time.
Thank you.
I just want to name that.
Yeah. It's a really disempowering time. And one of the things I have to say, like, it was a secret fear, and now I've been able to talk about it. It's not so secret. Like, one of the things I really worry about for the kids of today, the 2-year-olds who walk out of the house and see everyone in masks, the 9 and 10-year-olds who are being schooled at home. One of the things I worry about is, in this scary world, we are literally shut at home. And I fear that some kids will be scared to go back outside. They will be scared to go back to school. They will be scared to do all the things that normal teens do because of this sort of scary world. And of course, it's not just the pandemic, right? There are many things that make 2020 a scary world. And I fear that if parents don't have these kinds of conversations with their kids, then an unintentional consequence is that kids will just stay very insular. And one of the beautiful things about America is that we are engaged in the world. We value independence. We value going out and being engaged and compassionate and confident. And that's what I want to help parents help their kids get to.
That makes really good sense. I found myself, one of the questions that I was thinking about asking is spot on, consistent with that, in that these conversations, when you don't have them, or you assume, you know, maybe kids aren't impacted by it, or they're too young to understand that, when there's information that's not actually discussed and you leave things out, what happens to the problem? What happens to the anxiety? What are the impacts?
Right.
And you're naming the biggest worry is that, you know, kids shut down.
Right.
The anxiety is so big.
Right. Well, and also, you know, if you ask a parent this, no, you know, so I say, okay, these things, whether it's racial injustice or whether it's what's going to happen to me or you or us with the coronavirus or climate change or anything like that, would you rather your child learn about this from the kid on the bus or you? Right? Okay.
Right.
I've never met a parent who didn't say, I'd rather they learn about it from me. But there's no playbook. That's the problem.
Right.
No playbook.
Right.
So
this is as close to a playbook as they're going to get.
that was my goal. I mean,
I think you scored.
yeah, but I have to say, I stand on the shoulders of giants. I mean, the concept in the book of emotion coaching, which essentially this is what it's all about, is, John Gottman. He was the guy who was the pioneer of emotion coaching. And, the work on how we socialize our kids around emotions, Nancy Eisenberg at Arizona State, who's done all this work on how kids learn about emotions. Because ultimately, this is what it's all about. I mean, this is why these things are so hard to talk about, because they involve such big emotions and we get feelings in them.
No. So along those lines, when you think about, so before we shift over to the actual conversations, when you think about these big emotions that kind of get in the way, and you think about supporting parents, are there any other, things that you want to highlight now from that first part of the book about, what you would want parents to know or to think about or consider issues that you want to share with us to really kind of think about before you move into the essential conversations?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so in the beginning of the book, I sort of lay out some core skills or ideas for how parents can get started with the idea of helping their kids and themselves feel comfortable with emotions, right? So we know there are 3 ways that kids learn about emotions. They learn about emotions by watching us, their parents, manage our emotions, right? When we come home after a fight with the boss, or someone dents our car, or something else happens, how do our kids watch us regulate our own emotions? So that's one way. The second way is kids learn by experiencing how we treat their big emotions, right? So when our child comes in crying and we say, oh, stop crying, just get ready for soccer. Or, honey, I see you're crying. You look sad. What's happening?
Right.
That child learns something about emotions and what they are. And the third way is discussions, which we rarely have because we tend to talk about things rather than feelings, right?
Yeah.
So I have parents get familiar. So first of all, as we talked about, I have parents think about what their go-to strategies are. Give me a hot bath or a few deep breaths or a run. I mean, our team was talking, like I bookend my days. Run in the morning, hot bath at night. I'm good. But
Me too.
You too, right. But for kids, I encourage parents, for example, to have an emotions week, right?
Yeah.
Have a week where you focus on labeling and identifying and putting together emotions. Of course, it's easier with the younger children than with the older kids, but it could be something as simple as like looking at, one of my favorite games is the collage game, where you look at pictures of faces and you create stories around them. What's this person showing on their face? What's happened? Just to become comfortable. And then, of course, to help your children think about strategies for them when they have big emotions, because that's also some preparatory work. And ultimately, that is the work of children to develop self-regulation. And self-regulation isn't just emotion regulation, but if you think about the toddlers who, lie on the floor and flail and bang their heads, we have to regulate them. But as kids grow up, I mean, we expect kids to go to school able to sit on the floor, able to keep their hands to themselves when they want that toy and the other kid took it. And that is ultimately, so growing up is a process of developing emotion regulation, but parents don't, I mean, it's becoming more and more acceptable, but I often find that parents haven't intentionally thought about helping their children develop go-to strategies.
Yeah.
So
I think that makes sense. One of the things that you just said reminded me of something that you reflect on in the book that I know, but it was nice to read, that parents don't always get. This idea of kids being ready for school is not about knowing the ABCs or the 1, 2, 3s, right? It's that they can sit in the circle and they can wait their turn and they can participate in sort of the social emotional process of school. What an important message to communicate, and what a nice way to sort of set them up for that opportunity by going through your book.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, and I do a little bit of a whistle-stop tour of emotions across development, right? And anxiety across development, because, you know, that there's the little, you know, there's the 5-year-olds and the 10-year-olds and then the teens, you know, and
yes, I do.
Yeah. So it's worth parents, I think often parents, you know, you don't get a class in parenting, right? You don't get a license to parent.
No.
And I think often parents don't know about the natural history of emotions through development or anxiety through development. So
right. I think we're doing a better job with our kids, you know, with social emotional learning curriculums that are being implemented in schools. I think that's fantastic, but our parents haven't caught up, understandably, right? Yeah. This is a nice opportunity to get caught up,
Yeah.
Right. So let's shift to essential conversations. So the last big part of the book, maybe 2/3 of the book, are really about these conversations, essential conversations. And can you tell us a little bit about how that's structured, why you set it up the way you did, and what people can expect when they go in and dig into these?
Yeah. So actually in our work, we were joking about this earlier, in our work with parents. So for the last 15, 20 years, I've been working with parents and developing and testing programs for parents who've experienced traumatic events, which we know trauma interferes with our capacity to sort of, you know, parent effectively, or, you know, just, you know, stuff gets in the way. And so the goal of these parenting tools that we've been validating is to help parents deal with these difficult things.
Yeah.
And one of the most effective tools to help parents practice is what we call wrong way, right way role plays, or effective, ineffective role plays. We have such fun with those. So we might be modeling something and we will have a wild time with high drama modeling when things don't go well. And so I got the idea for the conversations from that. And also some, you know, parents asked me, and I'm going to be very honest here, you know, so I set up these conversations as what I call red light conversations and green light conversations. And I'm a mom of 4. I've had plenty of red light conversations. Yeah. It was not hard to do those.
They come naturally.
So the red light conversations are conversations we have when we have not had the opportunity to regulate the stuff that's coming in.
Yeah.
So those are conversations in which something's affected us, whether it's something related to our child or something else. And it could be a call from the principal, or it could be an irritating something with a child, or whatever it is. Yeah. And we react rather than respond. Yeah. And when we react, you know, often what happens is we do something in the moment, and then afterwards we say, oh, could I have rewound that? And so, but the red light conversations are so easy to have. And it's a simple, you know, one simple example is in the social media technology chapter, the first conversation is, and it happens all the time, sadly, a mom who's taking her 3-year-old through the supermarket. He's happily got the iPad and he's watching YouTube Kids, and they get to the checkout, and she looks over at what he's watching, and it is something horrifying. That is, and we all know that despite our best parental controls, things happen. And in this case, he saw something on YouTube Kids that should never have gotten to YouTube Kids. And in the red light conversation, mom is so shocked, she grabs the iPad from him. Of course, what does the child do? He thinks he's done something wrong, so he bursts into very loud tears. And then mom, she puts the iPad away. She says, no, you know, she leaves, and then she thinks to herself, oh, he probably didn't see it. I'm not going to say anything because if I do, I'll alert him. And then the next day in daycare, the teacher says, he drew a picture of this very disturbing scene. And mom realizes that he actually, of course, we wish that our young kids didn't remember things, but of course they affect them. The green light conversation isn't that different, but basically mom takes a half a second to breathe and realizes in that breath that if she snatches the iPad away, that will cause alarm and distress. And so instead, she distracts him at the till with which treat does he want? And she slides the iPad away from him. And he just blah, blah, blah. And in the car on the way home, she asks him gently what he was watching. And they have an opportunity to have an essential conversation around this very disturbing thing. And so that's all the difference between the red lights and the green lights. Often it's just a matter of taking a deep breath and making a choice about how you want to respond, rather than being swept away by your emotions and reacting.
So I think that's such a great illustration of the importance of being able to have that pause, that like really brief time between stimulus and response, right? And when I think about that, I wonder if you have any ideas about ways to strengthen that muscle so that when this pops up, parents are in a better position to be able to take that breath, like no, and then take that breath or whatever that might be to create that pause.
It's hard. I think it takes a lot of practice. And again, going back to the beginning of the book, I encourage parents to think about the kinds of things. Okay, mostly it's not like going to take a hot bath or a run because you don't have time. Often what happens is, these conversations happen at the bus stop or walking into the house or when someone slams the door or when you get a phone call from school. And so a lot of this happens in the moment. And so I am a very strong believer in the breath, but it doesn't have to just be a deep breath. I mean, there are several conversations and people sort of say, oh yeah, I appreciated that, where I have mom go over to the tap, to the sink and say, honey, let's have a glass of water and sit down with a cookie or whatever. That 30 seconds filling up the glass gives you time to take a deep breath and think about what you want to say. Along with, and I know we'll talk about this, the first couple of steps of the essential conversations are not actually about the issues at all. They're about the feelings, which also buys parents time to think about what they want to hear, what they might hear and what they will say about the actual thing that's the scary thing.
Yeah, you gave a number of great examples of how to buy time in your book. I was thinking,
I'm an expert. I've had to do it a lot.
I found myself thinking a little bit about sort of the power of, practicing mindfulness, practicing, meditation, not for great lengths, but just strengthening those muscles so that you can ground yourself and give yourself that little bit of time too. And you talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah. I mean, just, sort of unrelated to the book, but I'm wearing a smartwatch actually for work because we've got a new study where what we're doing is we're tracking heart rate variability of parents in the hope that, and then encouraging them to do 30-second to 2-minute mindfulness exercises at various points during the day.
That's awesome.
And the hope is, and really that's what we want, right? We want to be aware enough in the moment to say, this is the time where I need that 30 seconds.
Yep.
But you're right, it is like a muscle. It takes a lot of practice. Right. I don't think we need to become, Buddhist monks or yogis, but the just, and then there are so many ways to do it. There are many religions where prayer is like that meditation, or for many people it's exercise that is very meditative, but something that allows you, as you put it, to sort of broaden the gap between stimulus and response.
Yeah, sounds good. So thinking a little bit about the essential conversations, you just referenced sort of that there's some steps to it. I wonder if it might be a good time to sort of think about what goes into these.
Yeah. So, so what we can take, there's lots of examples. I usually give an example of a COVID example, but we can do,
That fits. I mean,
that fits.
of COVID, sure,
Yeah.
do it.
And boy, are we in the middle of a pandemic.
Uh-huh.
So I'm going to give a COVID example, but later I've got one more example I'd love to share.
Okay, great.
More relates to, we had a terrible summer in Minneapolis and in many countries, many cities and states around the country with the issues of racial injustice and the horrendous murder of George Floyd. I'll talk a little bit about that later, but let's take the example of COVID. Let's say your 11-year-old comes into the house. She's been playing with neighbors and she's crying, and you notice obviously something's bothering her, and you have a good guess as to what it is because you just picked up the phone and her friend's mom just called you to let you know that her mother is in the hospital with COVID. And so your child comes in crying, and in the first part of an essential conversation, you deal with your own, bing, 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 bing. You've just put the phone down and you're worried about your own mom. Who isn't?
Right.
Older, more vulnerable, and my neighbor's mom got COVID, and sort of it brings up a lot of stuff in us.
Right.
You take a deep breath and you turn to your child, and the first thing to do is to help her identify what she's feeling. And so she's crying, and I remember I talked about how we learn about emotions. One of the ways we learn about emotions is the way our parents treat us when we show big emotions.
Right.
And what we know is that emotion coaching, which is the nurturing of emotions, teaches kids that emotions are important and to be sort of carefully tended, because they'll help us in life. And kids whose parents emotion coach compared to kids whose parents dismiss their emotions or invalidate them or even punish them are kids who are far less likely to be vulnerable to anxiety and depression. And so you might say to your child, honey, I see you're crying. And usually when I'm crying, I'm feeling sad. Are you feeling sad? And she might say, I'm worried, Mom, and I'm sad for Michelle because her mom's mom is in the hospital. And explore it. So, wow, that's awful. And where are you feeling it in your body as well? Are you feeling it in your tummy? I know that when I feel sad, sometimes I have like butterflies. Yeah. And how about your heart? And oh yeah, I can feel your heart's beating pretty fast too. And by doing that, what you're doing is you're helping her to not only identify and label what she's feeling, but also to connect it with the sensations in her body. So you're sort of helping her develop an emotion vocabulary and connect it to how she feels. And I also talk in the book about how she's thinking and then how she behaves, right? Then you have the opportunity to validate the emotion, and that's really important. So, wow, no wonder you're feeling sad and worried. I would feel really sad and worried if my best friend's grandma was in the hospital too. And I remember when I was a little girl, about maybe a little bit younger than you, I remember that my friend's grandma was really, really sick, and I was so worried about her. And so that act of validating tells her what you are feeling is important. And that's really important. Now, that's a little bit of a process, but the advantage of going through that is not only that you help your child become more comfortable with understanding and trusting her emotions, but also you have some time to think about, wow, how am I gonna talk about COVID? So the next step is you listen. And I have a chapter earlier on in the book about active listening,
which was so fun.
Yeah, I mean, because it's so easy for us not to listen to our kids. It's so easy for us to assume we know what our kids are worried about.
Right.
And I think particularly with COVID, I think it's been really scary for some parents when they actually listen, because let's face it, what child isn't worried about their parents getting sick and dying? What child? And that's a very disturbing thing for parents to hear. But again, wouldn't you rather know the things that your child is worrying about? And so when you sit down, you really listen. You don't make assumptions about what your child is thinking, but you just say, tell me what's going on, tell me what. And you just use the opportunity to nod and engage and validate and listen. And then once your child has had a chance to listen, and by the way, and I always sort of forget to point this out, but the time to have that listening and then the subsequent part, which I'll talk about, is not when your child is hysterical. Like sometimes parents say, my child's hysterical, how am I going to have a conversation with him? You're not, right? You're not, because none of us can have conversations when we're up there.
No.
And so you do have a chance to label and validate your kids' emotions when they are feeling like that. And then you have an opportunity to sit down, have a snack, listen to music, sit in your room, just chill a little bit, and then we'll have a conversation. Let's talk about this when we're both a little bit calmer. But when you can have that conversation and after you've listened, I think some parent, all of us, what we want to say is, wow, that's awful. I'm so sorry, but don't worry. That's not going to happen to your grandma. I promise you, I am not going to get sick. Me and Dad, we're so healthy. Okay. So of course that's what we want to say.
Right.
But bing, 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 red light, we can't ever promise. I mean, certainly not now.
Right.
But there are some things that we can say. We can say, me and Dad, our job is to look after you and to make sure things are okay. And we work pretty hard at that to make sure that you're safe. And what we're going to do is now we're going to have a conversation and find some strategies to help you feel better when you feel stressed, to help you feel less worried. And so that is the problem-solving conversation around the emotion. When your child has a big emotion, this is a beautiful opportunity for you to teach some really cool strategies. Is it a stress ball? Is it some deep breaths? Earlier this afternoon, I was doing some balloon breathing with a young man, and balloon breathing is so fun. You breathe in for 5 and then you pretend you're blowing out this huge balloon, and you can do it together and things like that. But there's one more part of this conversation, which is the opportunity to problem solve the actual problem. And that in this case, it would be, I'm really worried about my grandma. Because my friend's grandma, I'm worried about my friend. I want to show my friend I care. And I'm also worried about our grandma, and by the way, about you. And so the problem solving conversation, once you've focused on the emotions, might be, how can we show grandma we care about her? How can we show your friend, what are some things that we can do to help you feel like you're doing something to show your friend and your grandma that you care? And the reason that is so important is because it empowers your child. There is something you can do. This is a stinky situation. This is awful. We're sad. We're worried. And there's always something that we can do to address the situation. And I don't know if, I can tell us, I've got a beautiful story of that with my neighbor, but I don't want to shut you off today, so I'll let you continue, and then maybe if there's time, I'll tell it.
As you were telling this, going through the steps, and as I was reading the various scenarios in your book, I found myself wondering your experience of like where parents get caught up. Like, where do parents have the hardest time in this process? As they're going through. I know where I think I have a hard time when I think about sort of the best way to do this. And I'm wondering for you what you see in terms of where people have a hard time.
I think the hardest thing for parents to do is not to jump in and problem solve immediately. Yeah. You're scared of the dark. We'll get you a nightlight.
Right. We'll fix this. This.
I think that's the hardest.
I wondered too a little bit about I made notes that like there are times when if this were a scenario that were coming to me, my brain would be like, oh my gosh, what happened? Tell me more of the details. And the focus is really on, we're not going to talk about the details now. We're going to kind of put those aside and we're going to focus on the emotional process. And we're going to think about how this is for you and make sure you're doing okay. That to me seemed like it would be consistently difficult for some people.
It's really hard. It is. I mean, you know, for example, with our military families, our military parents are amazing problem solvers. They are incredibly committed parents. And I think the military is a good example of a place where you are encouraged to suppress your emotions on the battlefield, for example.
Right.
And
right.
That's a hard thing to do. And for anyone who's been through something traumatic,
Yeah.
emotions can feel dangerous. And even if you've not gone through something traumatic, I think emotions can feel kind of a little loud, a little scary, and a little bit of a black box.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, fair enough. I feel like you made reference to something that you wanted to say later about some of the social justice stuff or your neighbor. And I know we have a ton of time, so I want to give you an opportunity to share what you think would be helpful for us to know.
Yeah, so I love this example.
Okay.
And every time I go outside and I see my neighbor, I tell her, I told you a story. It was a really hard summer, as I alluded to. For everybody around. I mean, it's been a tough year, but in the wake of the horrendous murder of George Floyd, you know, we live just a mile or two down the road, and there were helicopters everywhere, and there are a lot of young kids in my street, and there was a lot of discussion between the parents of how to talk. The kids are young, they're like 6, 7, 8, 9, how to talk to kids. And you know, one of my neighbors, her daughter's swim team captain, whatever it was, wanted to take all the kids to the George Floyd Memorial, and all of downtown was shuttered, and it was pretty scary. Like it was, you know, going through, and there were a lot of discussions, and I spend a lot of time in the book talking about how do you know, like, how do you think about what to tell your kids? How do you explain something that is really hard to explain? And that, of course, is what the conversations are so much about. But my other neighbor, who has a 5-year-old, lovely, happy-go-lucky kid, biking around in that week, biking around the road, fell off, breaks her leg. Poor kid. She's sitting in a chair, watching everyone else, hot summer, can't do anything. And she and her parents get talking about what's been going on. And she says, and this is sort of the last phase of the conversation, where they talk about how what's been happening has been very difficult for many people who live in the neighborhoods that were affected, that people can't buy food because all the stores are shuttered or looted, and so there was a food crisis. So this kid has a broken leg, and she's thinking, and she brainstorms with her parents ways that she can help. So she decides that she is going to go around the garden and pick flowers from their garden, tie them up, and sell them up and down the street. And she's going to take the money that gets from selling the flowers, and she's going to buy food and take the food over to the food shelves to help the people who can't get to a supermarket.
Wow.
Her parents bring her on a little radio flyer van down the street. I kid you not, with her friend. Then her grandma doubled the money, $800.
Wow.
So how do you think? And the parents took her to the supermarket. She sat in the trolley with her broken leg, saying, "Oh, we're going to get this." They made a plan. They figured out what food was important, and this kid felt like she could be the change in the world. I mean, and that's what we want for our kids.
Right.
So that's the beautiful fruit of an essential conversation.
Fair enough. Oh, wow. So I don't know if you heard that song just play. That was my alarm, and I thought it was just on vibrate, and it wasn't. So I apologize for that. That is to let us know that we're kind of running out of time. And so as we wrap up, I find myself thinking, one observation I want to make is that these essential conversations, you know, seem so important related to sort of kids managing their own anxiety and parents managing their anxiety. And I think it also really speaks to developing a relationship that really can foster emotional health and a long-term connected relationship between parents and kids, and really opens the door to be able to talk about really anything. And I think that that is just really important. It's not a point that you belabor at all, but I find myself thinking it's really an important byproduct of this. It really is. It's that strengthening of that dyadic relationship that's so important. So I just wanted to reflect on that. And then before we shift, is there any specific sort of takeaway advice before we move into the next sort of Q&A with Lonnie, that, you know, anything burning that you want to make sure that parents know that you want to impart as we close out?
Just that it doesn't take a lot of time. Just I say take 10, you know,
Yeah.
10 minutes a day. It doesn't take a lot of time. It's more an attitude than a time.
Okay. Well, that sounds great. All right. So, here's Lonnie. Hi, Lonnie.
Hey, Renee. Abby, that was excellent. Thank you so much. We have one question currently, and we had some questions that were submitted ahead of time, so I think we'll probably be able to get to everything. And if you're still watching, please feel free to still populate Q&A if you wish. And a reminder that we will be getting the after hours event will begin. This webinar will end at 8 o'clock. We'll have a short bio break, and we'll be beginning after hours at about 8:05. If you want to join, just check out the Bookstall's website, grab a copy of Dr. Abby's book. It's a fabulous book, very practical. Thank you so much for that. So here's some questions from right here, right now, from Heather. She says, when it comes to an anxious child, at what point should therapy, and my guess is either one of you could answer, at what point should therapy be considered for the child? And so maybe Abby, why don't you go first?
Sure. It's a great question. And I think, so I talk in the book a little bit about how there's typical anxiety. Anxiety is really, really important, right? So kids who don't have enough anxiety, people, get into trouble. But yeah, when do you know it's too much? And I would say the simple metric for me is when it interferes with daily life. When your child cannot get on the school bus to go to school, or is too worried that as soon as you leave their presence, they're frantic, or that they were dry at night and they're wetting the bed now and it's been going on for a while, or that they're not sleeping through the night. So those are kinds of things. And I think it's a hard question for parents, because I think often, our kids all go through short periods where things are tough, and that doesn't mean you need to see a therapist. But I think if you have, my sort of, it'd be interesting to hear what you think, Renee, but I would say a few weeks. If it's more than a month, it might be time. Yeah.
I would agree with
that.
You
want to add on to there?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think that's an important marker, the regression and the stepping back and the decrease in functioning. And that gets reflected in so many different ways. That's persistent. I agree there. We all have these blips where we have these moments and periods of time where our functioning is less than ideal. But if it persists for a period of time and, kids aren't functioning, I think it's time to take a closer look.
I'll ask a quick follow-up on that. Is there also a contagion effect with anxiety? In other words, there can be some leakage from the parent's anxiety down to the child, or perhaps within the child's friend group. If you are aware of kind of the friend groups and maybe some of the dynamics that's happening within the group, can your child be maybe also expressing something that isn't necessarily their own generation of anxiety, but is coming from around? And maybe, and I don't know if I'm right, I just play a shrink on TV.
100%. 100%. And especially now, right? We're living, I talk about the anxiety statistics, that anxiety's been going up everywhere. The book's on sale in England. So I looked at the statistics in England. They're even worse than here. It's really an anxious time. So yeah, the peer group and also parents. And that's why we want to put our own masks on, because we do influence our kids' anxiety.
And to your point earlier, Abby, too, we might gift them with the sort of internal experience, the biology, the inherited experience of anxiety as well.
Right. So I'm trying to get to two more questions here for sure, from Renee, a different Renee in Chicago, or maybe it is you, Renee.
No, it's not.
Okay, this wasn't enough of your own questions. You had some more. I got some more.
Let me ask myself something.
How do I avoid transferring my worries over remote learning deficiencies to my teen?
Oh, right. But that's one of those examples. You're so mad because, you just wish it could have been A, B, or C, better, different, whoever. And, parents are so stressed these days.
Yeah.
You're expected to be a parent, a worker, and a teacher.
Mhm.
And teachers are also incredibly stressed. They're expected to be in the classroom one day, out of the classroom the next day, and they also have their own, they may be parents themselves. It's a difficult situation all around. And so the whole thing of how, and the thing about teens is they're older. So often I think we feel like, we can show it a little bit more with them. But it does have that effect. I mean, there is a contagion effect when we express frustration, anger, or worry, or, oh, how are they going to graduate on time? We can't, we know that if we share that, that's going to become theirs. It's a hard thing to do. I think that the only thing I'll say that's different about teens is, as kids get older, there is a sort of just an honor. Life, there are frustrating things in life. So I think there's a term in dialectical behavior therapy, radical genuineness, and there is something to be said for radical genuineness. So
I'm going to mute you, Renee.
I don't know how to make this go away.
Let's get one more in here. From Ivy, we have from Ivy, what do you say to a child who doesn't want to go to school because they are afraid of bringing COVID home and causing a parent to become ill?
Well, that's exactly the kind of issue that requires an essential conversation. It's take the time to, first of all, are you worried about it? Right? Is your child concerned because of something that she might think, that she might have heard, or, again, ultimately the bottom line is listen and validate her concern. And those are valid concerns, right? And in your problem-solving conversation, you have some choices about sharing the fact that you're her parent and your job is to keep her safe and get her educated. And in your judgment, this is the best way to do that right now. And here are the safeguards that we have in place so that you don't get COVID. And bring, this is a very important, essential conversation. I might write that one up because I've heard it many, many times.
Yep, sounds like you should. All right, we're at 8 o'clock. Look at that. Woo, the trains are running on time. Abby, Renee, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. I know you gave such great value to the fan community, to all the parents tuning in.